I mean, we work extremely hard to build something that uses artificial intelligence, that has very advanced statistical analyses that go on in it, and yet it's beautiful. And it really tries to help people, almost like an angel on your shoulder. I always thought, and I told my team, I want to build an angel on your shoulder. It whispers just the right help at the right time.
The following is a conversation with Vic Strecher. He is the founder and CEO of Kumanu, a mental health app that helps people find meaning in their lives. In addition, he is a professor at the University of Michigan's School of Public Health, and he is the director of social entrepreneurship and innovation at the university. Finally, he is the author of the critically acclaimed book, Life on Purpose: How Living for What Matters Most Changes Everything. Without further delay, this is the MPods podcast, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you. Welcome in. It's so nice to have you here.
Great being here. Thank you.
Yeah, so we could just jump right in, and could you tell me a little bit more about why you decided to pursue Kumanu, and really what's the thesis behind it?
Well, I'm also a professor of public health at the university, and I'm really interested in what helps people live longer and live better. And living better to me is more important than living longer. And I know that a lot of people talk about life expectancy and disease and death. I'm a little more interested in life. I'm interested in what health really means to us. And health is not just the absence of disease. It's really your ability to live a flourishing and generative life, in my opinion. So I want to help people do that. And in doing so, I think they will take better care of their health. And I'm a behavioral scientist, so in public health, we would be concerned with helping people quit smoking or manage their stress or sleeping better or getting a mammogram or getting immunized for COVID. So there's any number of things that we try to do. But if you have a strong purpose and direction in your life, we've found people take care of themselves very naturally, not because they're worried about dying too young, but they're worried about having enough energy to fulfill a purpose that's bigger than themselves. So I'm very interested in this concept called self-transcendence, that we might transcend ourselves to want to do things bigger than ourselves. We need energy to do that. In order to get energy, well, I'll speak about myself for a second. I walk to the school here today from home, and that's about a 30-minute walk. It's not real long, but I try to walk every day to work. I try to sleep well. I try to eat right. I'm not perfect at any of these, by the way. I meditate every day, and I try to be creative in some way. And all of those things help me develop more energy so that I can achieve my purpose that I have in my life right now. And that to me is public health.
Yeah. So sort of fixing the purpose, and all the other blocks will fall into place after that.
And in thinking about what a person's purpose is, they need to go way back to the beginning of asking, who am I? What matters to me? What are the things that are important to me? What is my identity? Am I a giver? Am I hedonic and just want a pleasure seeker? And that's fine, by the way, but if you're only a pleasure seeker, Aristotle said, then we're like grazing animals. So maybe in addition to seeking pleasure, we might want to be a giver. We might want to be an achiever. Many students here are achievers, and they should be. They're very goal-directed and work very hard to be successful. But at the same time, maybe you want to be doing other things as well. Maybe you're an activist. Maybe you're more of a traditionalist and like to keep things the way they are. There are all sorts of different identities that we have. And thinking about who you are, as an individual helps you find purpose. And once you have that purpose and direction, then it becomes very motivating and it starts organizing your behaviors and the goals you set in your life.
So how does Kumanu help people find that purpose?
Yeah, getting back to Kumanu, I'm sorry, I should have started there. So Kumanu is a well-being company, and we're interested in helping people find purpose in their lives. One way to do that is to think about the time that most of us spend awake, and that's work, at work, or working. And so helping employees find greater purpose and direction, not only in their life, but in their work, I think can be very helpful. So a lot of us, and I know you are all, and probably the listeners to this podcast, work very hard so that you can have a job that has purpose in it and direction to it. But what we have found is that you can have purpose in just about any type of job. So crafting purpose from your job is something that we're very interested in. Kumanu helps do that. We also, though, importantly, help you develop purpose in your life, with your family, with your community, with yourself. So we have an app, phone and web application in Kumanu called Purposeful. And Purposeful helps you identify, first of all, what are your strengths? What are you like when you're at your best? Also asks about your purpose. And so in doing so, asks what are the things that matter most to you? How would you like to be remembered? What are you grateful for? Are there people who inspire you? Things like that. So we go through a whole exercise or set of exercises designed to help you solidify your purpose more. And then we help you become more intentional in the day so that you can be purposeful. It's not enough just to have a purpose. Oh, I have a purpose, now I can stop. It's important to be purposeful every day, to be intentional every day toward things that matter most. What that also means is that you're spending less time on things that don't matter. Gossip, social media, a lot of things that end up getting people upset, causing a lot of emotional distress. We want to help address emotional distress by helping people focus more on the things that matter most in their lives. And that's what we do through an app. We do it through a set of workshops for leaders and through all the way through mid-level managers. In addition to working with employers, we also work with seniors. So we have a very large customer that has literally millions of older adults, and we work with them as well. Because once you've retired, or just as you're thinking about retiring, you really need to think about repurposing your life. I mean, so often people, especially people who have done amazing things during their career, then suddenly they go, oh, I think I'll just play golf or whatever. And then they realize after 5 days they're terrible at golf, and they're sore and their knees are sore, and they're just watching the Golf Channel and eating junk food. And after a while that doesn't pay off, and those people end up much more likely to develop Alzheimer's, dementia, and to die earlier. So as a public health professional, I want to see retirement becoming a source of generative, healthy behaviors as well.
Yeah, better be aware of that golf.
I love golf too. I love these other things. I love things that older people do. It's just that if you're not purposeful, if you don't have some sort of transcending purpose, if there's not a way that you can give to others in some way to generate something that's bigger than yourself, then if you lack challenges in your life, if you're just there on the beach sipping martinis, you'll die. I mean, your body will start shutting down. It's not a way to retire. It's not a way to live.
So that's the advice to the cohort of people going into retirement. I know my parents discovered this the hard way. They had this idea of retirement, of just relaxing, and when they get there, it's not how they imagined it when they were working.
I think what happens too is if you say, well, we're just going to play golf all the time, or pickleball, or we're going to eat out, and we're going to travel, every one of those experiences becomes less valuable the more you have them. So after a while, you're eating out all the time, then suddenly the food doesn't taste quite as good as it did the first time. Maybe the service isn't quite as good. Maybe that round of golf isn't as good if it's the 100th round you've played that year. You start getting bored with life because there's no challenge anymore in what you're doing. So it's important, I think, to have a purpose and direction in your life. Having transcending purpose seems to be more beneficial for people. And we study this right down to the DNA level.
So about that transcendent purpose, you've written a book about this. So I want to ask you about your book, Life on Purpose, how living for what matters most changes everything. Could you take me through what, and the listeners too, what sort of you go through in your book and
Sure.
outline?
Yeah, well, the motivation of the book was passing the death of our daughter, Julia, 14 years ago when she was 19 years old. She died very suddenly, unexpectedly, of a heart attack. And when that happened, I went through a very difficult time, as did my wife. We decided that we would grieve in our own ways. So my wife, who's a sculptor and gardener, did sculpting and gardening in Ann Arbor. I went to northern Michigan, on Lake Michigan, to a cottage we have, and I started basically drinking and eating myself to death. And I started watching anything on television, not caring what it was. I just started to not care about anything. Or I should say, I stopped caring about anything. And I found myself 2 miles out on Lake Michigan in a kayak at 5:15 in the morning. And I could barely see the shore. It was freezing cold. It was about this time. And when I was out there, so the water was very cold. If I had fallen in, I certainly would have died. I didn't have any life protection or anything. I was just, in fact, in my boxers and t-shirt. That's too much information, but all I did was get up out of bed. You know, I'd been by myself for a month, and I just got out of bed. I looked outside and thought, I need to get in that kayak. It's so beautiful and smooth. And it was still dark, and I just went out. And I thought, maybe I'll just keep going to Wisconsin, which is 84 more miles. So it wouldn't have worked, of course. But I didn't care. I thought, it's such a beautiful morning. This is a good morning to die, maybe. And the sun came up suddenly when I was thinking that. And everything around me, which I write about in the book, started glowing. It was just the sun, reflecting its light off the water. And I felt my daughter in me. And I don't know how to explain that as a scientist at all, but I felt my daughter was telling me that I needed to get over this. And also, I felt calmed by the idea that I could choose. I could choose to die if I wanted to, or I could choose to live if I wanted to, but I also knew the responsibility of living meant that I would need to find new purpose and direction. I couldn't live the way I was continuing to live. There's no way. I already died that way. So I decided to turn around, of course, or I wouldn't be here. And I sat down at a table like this, pulled out a sheet of paper, and just without even thinking, I started looking down at myself and said, you have to help yourself, Vic. Why don't you write down the things that matter most in your life? So I literally just started writing, okay, my family, our older daughter, Rachel, my wife, Jerry. I wrote down family members, and then I thought, what about work? What matters? Like, you love your research, you love lots of parts of work, but the thing I love most is teaching. So I wrote down my students. And I had this sudden realization that the university had let me take off that semester and the next semester because, you lost your daughter. It was a difficult time. And I called the university that morning and said, I've been thinking about this, and the worst thing I can do is not teach. I want to go back and teach, and I'm going to teach my students as if they're Julia, my daughter. And when that happened, everything changed in my life. Suddenly, my students appreciated that because I spent time with them. And of course, I'm not their parent, but at the same time, there are so many students in need who had specific needs in their lives, issues, problems that they were having. And I would always sit down with them and say, maybe I can help if you want to talk about it. I'm not a therapist, so don't pretend I am. But if you just want to talk, that's fine. And after a while, the hallway started getting filled during my office hours with 12 people or 15 people. And my dean's office was right across from my office. And he would always joke about it. He'd say, oh, there's Strecher's office hours, because there's a long line of students. And so I knew that they needed something. And I also enjoyed teaching in this new way. I'd look at all of them and think to myself, you're Julia. If you're having a hard time, I'm going to help you, or at least offer that. Not everybody wants. And in order to do that, since I had hundreds of students, I taught 2 classes. They're both large classes. I started realizing I needed to be purposeful every day. So I started walking to work. I started sleeping better. I developed this moniker called space, that I need to sleep, be present, be active, be creative, and eat well, or SPACE, space. Sleep, presence, activity, creativity, eating. And I started just monitoring myself, just using a simple statistical program. I started monitoring every day, how are you doing? And then looking at what gave me energy down the road. And I found that creativity for me was the number 1 thing I could do. Number 2 was good sleep. But it's different for different people. And I thought, maybe I should create an app like this to help people. And that's what I started doing.
So for people, what do you think, well, you studied purpose. What do you think people don't understand about purpose?
Yeah. Well, a purpose is a self-organizing life aim. It often starts from your core values. So if one of my core values is to, my students, then a purpose related to that would be to teach my students as if they're my own daughter. That's a purpose. That starts organizing my behavior. It organizes goals that I have in my life. It's why I then say I better sleep well, or I need more energy if I'm going to do that. If I'm going to be a more engaged husband or father or now grandfather, I need to do certain things. I might need to be a better listener. So I start working on certain things that I consider important strengths to develop. I also may say, oh, I have a real strength in this area. I wonder if I can use that. So I start organizing my life according to the strengths that I have, the strengths that I need, according to my core values, and I start trying to live every day that way. It's a life that becomes more intentional. So for me, I don't know about you, but I wake up in the morning and I take a look at my smartphone and I look at the weather. What's the weather going to be like? Okay, now I know how to dress. I look at my calendar. What am I going to need to prepare for? Well, today I taught a class. I was in a meeting with a large corporation and I'm doing this podcast, and I'll do 2 or 3 other things this afternoon. Then afterwards, I'll go out to have dinner with some friends. So all of those things help me figure out, okay, what do I need to do? What should I wear? Excuse me. I become more intentional. And then folding in my purpose. How do I become purposeful every day? So I think about the students that I just taught here. I've never met any of them, but I looked at and said, you're all my daughter.
A very beautiful way to think about teaching.
Well, it helps me a lot. And it's come back as well. Students have been very kind to me in what they've said. And I think 8 years ago, I was asked to be the honorary captain of the football team for Jim Harbaugh because of my students. They wanted me to be this professor, that was distinguished. And those things are wonderful, and I love the feedback I get, but I'm not doing it for that. I have this more intrinsic motivation to do this, and it feels good to do it. And it keeps me very alive. I'm 68 years old, so in thinking about, my age, people ask, when are you going to retire? And I go, why should I retire? This is the most fun thing I could possibly do. And, some people, after they lose a child, many people say it's the hardest thing that you can go through. I don't know if that's true, but for me, it was very difficult. But I can say, thanks to my daughter, I have been living a very, very big life, a very generative life, a very fulfilled and flourishing life. And I wanted to give that to other people, which is why I created Kumanu. Kumanu, by the way, is Maori. The Maori people are the indigenous people of New Zealand. They're very fierce. If you've ever watched the last Olympics, the New Zealand women's rugby team had a lot of Maori women on it, and they were so fierce. They're scary. But they have this beautiful word for nourish and cherish, and it's Kumanu. So I was sensitive. I didn't want to appropriate their name, of course, but I think out of complete respect for that culture And that beautiful word, I thought it was a word that represented what I wanted to do, which is have a company that's very fierce. I mean, we work extremely hard to build something that uses artificial intelligence, that has very advanced statistical analyses that go on in it, and yet is beautiful. And it really tries to help people, almost like an angel on your shoulder. I always thought, and I told my team, I want to build an angel on your shoulder that whispers just the right help at the right time.
And about the technical capabilities of Kumanu.
Yeah, so like AI is a big thing right
Yeah.
now, and we have been seeing examples of companies utilize AI to help analyze people's mental health situations and figure out how to do better in their lives. So I wonder, what's your insights on that? Is that something Kumanu want to use too?
We actually started using AI 8 years ago, well before ChatGPT, in using some very deep machine learning and predictive modeling, looking at everything from the day of the week to the weather, the day of the month, when you might be paid or not, gas prices, a lot of things externally, and as well as internal quick questions about how you slept, or other elements of your life. If you open Purposeful, the first thing it asks is how you're doing, and then it drills in a little bit deeper. And I can show it to you if you want, but it's very easy to use. And then it uses AI. Now it's using a lot of generative AI to start building a relationship with you.
Yes.
So it says, yeah, it's great that you slept well. It's great that you've got energy right now. Is there anything that you're planning on doing that's important today? Anything you want to focus on? You may say, oh, I have a big class that I'm teaching. And it will go, wow, it's great that you have the energy and you slept well to get ready for the class. Wonderful. Is there anything that I can help you with? And then you can put that in. So we also have some very significant guardrails around AI, because if you simply use ChatGPT or other generative AI systems and start trying to use it as a therapist, there are many ways it can go off the rails, many ways that it can end up doing things that you really don't want it to do, and certainly that a company would not want. We need to maintain control over the type of feedback that's going back to the user. For example, the internet is absolutely full of misinformation on what to do to improve your health. We don't want any of that coming back to the person. So we have thousands of tips and strategies that are carefully vetted, very evidence-based, scientifically based, and we have, clinicians who work on this very carefully. So we have a huge library of advice. The type of advice you get and the interactions that you have can be generative AI based. But ultimately, the specific advice you get needs to be advice that we've carefully considered.
So do you view like AI as more like a tool for people to use to figure out their situations, or you would say maybe one day it could be a replacement of the therapist?
Of course AI will continue to get smarter and better. Well, I shouldn't say of course. There could even be this, people have talked about generative AI starting to use other generative AI to create its own generative AI. And in that case, it's going to start flushing itself down the toilet. You're going to get worse pieces of advice. And you absolutely don't want something like that. So we have to be real careful about where it goes. It's also not all that good in math. I mean, I asked it last year before teaching a class, and I decided all my class should be able to use Gen AI. I mean, they're going to anyway, so why should I stop it? But I decided to how many gallons of water were in Lake Michigan. The answer I got was enough gallons to have filled a small water tank in a town. And I said, how'd you come up with that? And it gave me the whole calculations, but I forgot a couple of very important elements and miscalculated the entire thing. So just letting ChatGPT or other Gen AI make significant, serious decisions for our health and well-being, whether it's physical or emotional, mental health, could run into real trouble. So I like human-computer interfaces. I like computers helping guide or encourage or transition, but I still want to have full control over what the person gets.
So does Kumanu right now embed ChatGPT or
Yes.
AI into its
Yes,
services?
and we've just literally started it. So, but we've been working on it for, I don't know, about a year. So I only have a test version of it right now. It's not in the hands of people, and it'll take probably another month or two, and then it will go. And then it's just one element of it. We're starting to extend it out to many other parts of our purposeful app. Yeah. So it's just beginning, but we've got some brilliant people at Kumanu who love to do this and are out there on the bleeding edge. I'd just like to I want that. I want to be way out ahead. At the same time, what the end user gets has to be very carefully tested. This is serious stuff
Yeah, so we're in the long term, where do you see the role of AI in health? I know you said as an assistant to be therapist, but long term, where do you see it?
I can't predict 80 years down the road. Things have happened so fast in my lifetime. I mean, when I was your age, we didn't have computers like this. We had mainframes. So, who's to say? I've always tried to be on that leading edge and always tried to be on top of, having the first laptops and the Apple Newton when it just came out. We were doing a lot of tests of it too, a lot of research using these early, and I know enough to say things will happen in unpredictable ways. What I will say is we must find ways to use technology to make us more human. And so far technology, at least, especially with social media, is making us, in my opinion, less human. And we need to return to discovering what it means to be human. And maybe what it means to be human is going to be different than what it was. I wouldn't doubt that at all. Where we have many more biometric devices, brain implants, I certainly see that. A lot of people are working on that. I certainly see this being used, because it just will, for the wrong things, how to get us to buy things more. Certainly the internet has been taken over by marketers and salespeople, learning how to tailor information to every single action you take. Now you're being deluged with information that's very deeply tailored to you. Politically, I think it's really difficult too, where now we all live in these filter bubbles and we are just not exposed to the way other people think, the way another quote side thinks. We think about everything in terms of my side versus your side, much more than when I was your age. I felt like we could see both sides of issues much more carefully because we weren't exposed to the same filtering. I'm very worried about that. So it's one reason I built Kumanu, because I want people to transcend that ego wall that they've built around them, the filter bubble, whatever metaphor you want to use. I think people live within those walls. I want people to transcend those walls and be able to talk to each other without those walls. If you're familiar, you go to Thanksgiving dinner and everybody says, well, don't bring up politics with Uncle George. Uncle George is just, he's dreadful. We don't agree with him at all. I say, I'm going to. No, but I always try to, in bringing up something, I start with what are the values that you care about? Maybe it's the education of our children. Maybe it's our health. Whatever those things are, there must be common values that we share. And then we work our way down and ask, how are we trying to solve those? And then suddenly we can have a very good conversation, as opposed to a yelling match that's based on what you just heard from Fox News or the New York Times and NPR. I mean, you have to get out of your own filter bubble and start understanding. But to do that, you might transcend to commonly shared values.
So that framework of, it seems like you are a big fan of Greek and ancient literature.
I am.
So how does that inform your actions with Kumanu and also with what you teach your students?
Well, Aristotle talked about two kinds of happiness and well-being. One he called hedonic, so hedonism, we're familiar with pleasure seeking. And he said that's fine. I mean, we all like good food or good wine or good sex or good vacations or whatever. Those are natural for us to like and enjoy and seek. But if that's all we enjoy and seek, then we are, and I'll use his phrase, then we're like grazing animals. He said something bigger is being in touch with our inner God, our daemon, D-A-I-M-O-N. That was Greek for true self or true God. Greeks believed we were born with that. If you're Hindu or Buddhist, you talk about the Atman, A-T-M-A-N. The Atman is this inner God that we're born with. The Greeks felt that being in touch with that daemon, that true God, inner God, they called it eudaimonia. Some people pronounce it eudaimonia. Either way is fine. But eudaimonia means you are being in touch with a transcending self, something that's bigger than you, and trying to understand and be in touch with that. Socrates' students used to say, Socrates was in touch with his daemon, his inner daemon, more than anyone we know. And a person who is in touch with his or her inner daemon, Plato said, must be truly happy. So that's a deeper form of happiness than just having more. So we're already talking about this, people who are just sitting on the beach and sipping martinis and watching the Golf Channel. And while that's pleasurable, those sort of extrinsic pleasures become less pleasurable the more you have them, the more times you have them. And that's just the truth. I mean, it's just simply a fact that it's kind of like if you have $1 million, every dollar has a certain value. If you have $10, every dollar has a certain value. Which dollar has more value? Yeah. If you only have 10. So if you start looking at your own life as being very finite, and you only have a certain number of years to live, a certain number of days, a certain number of minutes to live, and this is something my daughter Julia taught me really through her own life, then every one of those minutes, hours, and days becomes more valuable. And so why should I sit around wasting it? Should I be high the whole time? Should I just watch TV the whole time? Should I, be worried about what other people are thinking about me the whole time? For me, the answer is clear.
Yeah, I can definitely see the power in that journey. Also want to just hear about your views on young people like us. How do we live a more purpose life, especially given some situations where we lost directions, getting to a depressed period? How do we, as young people, get out of it and find the real purpose for life?
It's a wonderful question you're asking, because I've been teaching for 40 years, so I'm not young. I've never seen students in greater distress overall. Not every student, but I've never seen more depression, suicidal ideation. I go through my classes now where it's absolutely common for somebody to be hospitalized, for a mental health disorder problem. My office hours are filled with people who have very, very serious issues, and I'm not a therapist, so I'll refer them. But there's, even beyond that, there's a larger portion of people who are just simply sad. They're lost. They don't know what they want. And they feel, often social media makes them feel like they're not having as much fun as everybody else. They feel like the world is coming to an end with climate change and all the problems they see every single day through the media. And the media really is to blame for this. The media focuses on, as they say, if it bleeds, it leads. So, the things that are traumatic, disasters, every single day, we get more of those now than ever. So we don't really have as much of, and then COVID made things much, much worse. It put us all in these little cages and didn't allow us to interact. So people your age, very often, I'm not saying you, but very often weren't able to get some very important skills that people get at your age in terms of how to interact with people. You know, in high school, maybe you had certain skills, and you had a certain group of friends probably, and you had certain teachers you liked and teachers you didn't like, and you went through the standard things in high school, but suddenly now you're out on your own. You don't have your parents there, and you don't have those same friends, and suddenly you could be very much alone, and you may also feel like you don't belong here. You may feel like, and many people feel like, how did I ever get in here? I must be a fake. And so they worry about that. There are many things that people have. One thing that research has found for people who feel that way, like they don't belong, is literally simply writing down what matters most to them, what we call values affirmation. And again, leading to a purpose, leading to a direction, starting to focus on things that matter most, and really start eliminating, if at all possible, things like social media as much as possible. Not worrying nearly so much what other people may think about you. This is a time to start expressing you, yourself, who you really are. Not who you were in high school, but who you are now. And at the same time, this is a period where there's a part of your brain called the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. This is right up here between your eyebrows, half an inch in. And that VMPFC, ventral medial prefrontal cortex, part of the prefrontal cortex, we have 3 times more of this than any primate, for example, and more than any other animal. I like to call it the guru brain, but it's not fully developed in men until, on average, you're about 22, and till you're about 24, and in women, when you're about 22. So women seem to develop all the connections faster than men. Women all know this, of course. But so there has to be a lot of acceptance that you're going to do goofy things. And being at Michigan, there's so much stress, there's so much pressure to conform, to be successful, to do well, all those things. And yet there's another big part of you that says, I need to be an idiot. I need to do goofy stuff. I need to play. I need to learn how to do new things that I've never done before. And that's a really hard thing if you've been cooped up through COVID for a few years.
I definitely agree with that. Maybe we need a few more goofy things.
It's really good to act. Well, I look back and look at all the stupid things I did and how I acted. And sometimes I berate myself for it, and other times I need to allow myself some forgiveness for the fact that my brain wasn't fully wired. I mean, it's almost like I'm just not quite a full-fledged human yet, not totally connected, and that's okay. You're not. Just any more than a baby is, when they're just starting to learn things. You're at a certain stage, and you're still getting everything wired up. A lot is wired, but still there's quite a bit that's not fully put together. And also you have a lot of experiences you need to try out and learn and have fun and take some risks. Do those things that very often when you're in a university, it's frowned upon,
Yeah, I know as a senior or even became as a junior, we're gonna enter in the working environment sooner or later. Just wonder how is your views on the employees' mental health in today's working?
The first thing I recommend to my students who are graduating is don't work right away. Take a year off if at all possible. If you can take a gap year or 2 or 3 and do something like join the Peace Corps or Teach for America or something, volunteer in something that helps you learn more about the world, or take a real job doing something. I was just in Andy Hoffman's class. Andy's a professor here. He's a very distinguished professor, just doing his sabbatical in Harvard right now. He's teaching this course about, basically how to live your life as a human. When he was growing up and going through college, he went to MIT, great school. Then he became a carpenter for a while. And then he went back. People somehow think that if they move on a different vector and somehow they're gonna, that somehow they'll get stuck in that. You may find that you love being a carpenter or love being a plumber or love teaching in the Peace Corps, or that you really don't like doing some of those things, but you've learned a lot. And now you're gonna go back to a job. You're gonna be a much more valuable job candidate. Or if you go to grad school, you're gonna be a much more interesting person as you're applying, whether it's to business school or med school or anything. I'd much rather see a person applying to our program who has been out in the real world and sees what it's like and not just completely going through. So I recommend that, number one. I think that when you're going into the job market, make sure you interview them as much as they're interviewing you. And I know that sounds hard to do because you're trying to do anything you can to get the job, but don't. Interview them, because if you have a bad boss, your life will be miserable. If you have a good boss, you can have the most amazing life, even if you're not doing what you had trained to do. 80%, 10 years after graduation, 80% of the people who are working are doing things that they weren't in college to become. 80%.
Yeah.
So, you could almost assume you're not going to be doing what you expect to be doing. Just think about this college career as a toolkit that you're building. Learn how to do things. Learn how to write really well. So taking a writing class. Learn how to use a spreadsheet really well. Like accounting. I know that seems silly, or maybe it doesn't seem silly to you, but I love getting some basic skills, statistics, being able to do that. But most people have to write. Public speaking. It's amazing how many times people have to get up there and speak. And if you're up there and nervous, there's no way you're going to, really excel in your career. Those simple, basic things, you may even take an acting class to learn how to do that. I know that sounds weird, but I took an acting class when I was a freshman, and it was like, and I never thought I was funny. And the acting professor said, you have a very funny body. The way you move is very funny. And so starting to work on that as you do public speaking can be helpful. Just little things like that. Just pick up some of these skills that that we don't talk about. Your advisor probably doesn't say, oh, you should take an acting class or, whatever.
Yeah.
So, and then pick a good boss. Interview, and a really good interviewer will appreciate the fact that you're interviewing them. And if you're interviewing for a company and you might, they're talking about you and, you want to impress them, you'll impress them by going, does your company have a purpose or mission? I read what it says on the website, but tell me how real that is. Because there's a lot of purpose washing. There's a lot of people who, and they might try to convince you, or that suddenly there may be this little thing that they do with their face, and you go, oh, they don't have a purpose, do they? And so these are really important things to find out.
So get a foundational level skills of writing, statistics.
So that you can be opportunistic, because somebody will say, hey, do you have the skills to do this? If you go, oh no, because I'm doing this, it's going to be a struggle. Have the toolkit.
And interview them as much as they're interviewing.
I think that it's important to interview the person who's interviewing you. Yeah. Not them specifically, but the company. You're interviewing that company. And you don't want to get tell me why you should think, I should work for your company. But you can do it subtly, and you can do it in ways that impress that person who's interviewing you. And if they're not impressed, then you shouldn't be working there.
I want to be respectful of your time, as you've been so gracious with giving us your time today. And I just have a fun question for you, maybe a bit more deep. You're a big fan of Viktor Frankl.
Yes.
The author of Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
Let's say you had a dinner with him. What would you ask Viktor?
Oh my gosh.
At that dinner?
I would, first of all, be so grateful to sit down to dinner with Viktor Frankl. I think it would be amazing to talk about what we have been finding in modern science, in neuroscience, in epigenetics, and many of the things that we're looking at, examining now, and finding are things that he wrote about and observed in 3 concentration camps. And I'd love to hear his commentary about what people are finding. And I think he would appreciate what people are doing now to learn. There are over 1,000 studies now that have looked at purpose in life. And so it's a very important subject for scientists to understand well-being. How do we make people happier and more generative? And purpose is one of those key parts, and that's something Viktor Frankl talked about. So it'd be fun to talk about that. It'd be fun to talk about what he does for fun too. You know, I mean, he seems so serious all the time. I wonder if he golfs or, and it'd be, you know, what kind of food do you like, Victor? You know, let's just sit down and enjoy that. I'd probably take a walk with him, and we'd take a long walk and chat about both of our experiences. You know, when I think about the loss of my own daughter, that's a tragedy, of course, but the things he went through, he lost his whole family, and he saw thousands of people murdered or starved to death. And so what he went through is so significantly greater. And the people then that he ended up interacting with, Abraham Maslow, he convinced Maslow to start thinking more about transcendence. The top of Maslow's hierarchy, you probably heard about Maslow. It used to be having peak experiences. That's what self-actualizers did. And Frankl said, you know, Abraham, that's great, but something higher than that is self-transcendence. When you're not thinking about yourself, you're thinking about something bigger than yourself. And Maslow, to his credit, said, you know what, you're right. I hadn't thought in that way. And he spent the last 10 years of his career, Maslow, studying self-transcendence. So it'd be fun to talk with Frankl about what he thinks self-transcendence is, who self-transcenders are, what they're like, how you can be more self-transcending. Because I don't think it's suddenly you're a transcender or not. I think, you know, you can, in some times of a day, you're more transcending than other times. But I'd love to learn more about how he thinks about it. Thanks for the question. That was fun.
Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you everyone for listening for this episode. We're really happy to have Professor Vic here today to talk about his experience and how young people can find purpose in their life. I feel really energized after I talked with Professor Victor. I hope you guys enjoy this episode too.